Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming back today. We appreciate you. For those of you that were here yesterday, thanks for coming back. And for those of you who may have missed yesterday, just to let you know, the audio, video, and the PowerPoint slides that were presented will all be available on our website. So if you want to check that out in the days to come, it will allow you to understand what we did yesterday, and also we'll have the material from today and tomorrow. So the whole program, the whole course will be online. So if you miss a day or want to revisit some of those ideas, feel free just to visit our website. It's just mercatus.org. And from there, you just go to the events page and find this event, Southern Comfort, and it'll be able to get you what you're looking for. Also, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Millennium Challenge Corporation for partnering with us in today's program, for this entire week's program. We are honored that we can partner with them to try and put these ideas into practice, and how the balance between ideas that the Mercatus Center is trying to provide and the action that the Millennium Challenge Corporation is trying to provide, and how those two intersect. So we're pleased to partner with them, and they've been great to work with, and we look forward to tomorrow. Also, last week we had a great event with them as well, looking at the future of foreign aid. Ambassador Danilovich, the CEO of the MCCs, spoke, as did Frederick Sauté, one of our scholars at Mercatus, as did Dr. Bill Easterly from NYU. So if you are interested in that, please check out our website, and you can find the video from that program as well. In front of you, you'll find a blue sheet. We ask that you fill that out before you head out today, as your comments are always helpful to us. Also, there's an opportunity to sign up for CEC credits through George Mason University. So if you give us a home address, we'll process that for you and ship you off a neat little certificate that you can put on your fridge and feel good about yourself. So if that's of interest to you, please feel free to take advantage of that. And then finally, I'm just going to introduce today's speakers. I'm going to actually introduce Karol, who will speak first and give a few comments, and then she, in turn, will introduce Dr. Sanjak, who will then share her comments as well, and then we'll be able to field question and answer for probably 15 to 20 minutes. I know they've got a World Bank appointment to get to around 2 o'clock, right? So we'll be cutting it close, but we should have plenty of time to answer all your questions. Karol Boudreaux is a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center. She's the lead researcher on our Enterprise Africa project. If you have any questions about that, we're happy to field those questions for you. It's a great program looking at enterprise-based solutions to poverty throughout the continent of Africa. We've got great research projects that we've already concluded and are in the process of doing right now. So if you have any questions pertaining to Africa specifically, please grab Karol or myself, and we'll do our best to answer those questions for you. In addition, she also teaches a course on law and international development at GMU. As a testament to Karol's hard work on this Enterprise Africa project, she has been appointed a member of the Working Group on Poverty Rights on the UN's Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor. So it just speaks to the quality research that she has been undertaking and the quality work she puts out. So we are proud of her and proud to associate ourselves with her. And if you could help me welcome Mrs. Karol Boudreaux.
Thank you very much. Let me also add my welcome on behalf of the Mercatus Center and on behalf of George Mason University. We're very pleased to have you here today, and we're particularly delighted, as Jeff said, to be able to partner with the Millennium Challenge Corporation today and be able to discuss with you some questions relating to land security tenure security. So the focus for this week's program is on Latin America, but because I do most of my work in Africa rather than Latin America, I'm going to provide some general comments, and then I will turn the program over to the real star of this show, Dr. Sanjak. I wanted to give you a few comments, and I thought about a way to enter into the discussion with you this morning, and I thought we might begin by talking a little bit about uncertainty and the kinds of uncertainty that poor people around the world face. When I think about uncertainty, I think of uncertainty as a kind of hidden tax that many poor people have to pay in the developing world. And it's a tax that we don't often recognize, and it's especially burdensome for poor people in situations relating to land and their tenure rights over land. So I want to give you just a couple of examples of the way in which uncertainty creates real problems, real hardships for poor people in the developing world. So one of the main ways in which uncertainty creates problems, or one of the main ways in which uncertainty over your ability to use and control land is manifested is in terms of forcible evictions. So it's not uncommon, for example, that either governments or private sector actors will forcibly evict, use coercive action to literally throw people out of their homes, which creates tremendous difficulties for the people who then have to replace their homes, who have no place to live, who are now far away from jobs, far away from work. And maybe the key example of the difficulties of forcible evictions that we've seen over the past several years has been Operation Marambatsvina in Zimbabwe, where the government went into one of the informal settlement areas outside in Harare and threw 200,000 people out of their homes. When you have a situation in which people have tenure insecurity, it means that governments and private sector actors will take advantage of their ability to do these sorts of things. Another example of insecurity that poor people have to face that the rest of us don't really think about, or those of us in the developing world don't think much about, is the problem of land grabbing. Land grabbing can be done by government officials. It can also be done by private sector actors, and it's a deeply troubling phenomenon not only in Africa, but in many parts of the world. So in Cambodia, corrupt land swaps have displaced thousands of local people to the benefit of corporations and others. In China, we know this. Over the past several years, there have literally been thousands of protests, mostly of folks living in rural areas, protesting the fact that government is grabbing land to give it to favored commercial sector actors or other folks. This is a problem of tenure insecurity that's affecting thousands upon thousands of people in China. Or the example I'm more familiar with is in sub-Saharan Africa. It's very common for women and children to face the following problem when it comes to land grabbing. Women will be married. Their ability to control land is overseen or overseen by customary rules and principles. These customary rules and principles give primary rights to control land to men, to husbands, to fathers, to brothers. In the case where a woman is widowed, she and her children will face real uncertainty because relatives can come in and literally seize the property away from the woman, disempowering her, dispossessing her of her property, making she and her children more vulnerable, oftentimes causing women who live in rural areas to be forced to migrate to urban areas where they face even more difficulties. I brought along with me to read you just one quote, a story from a website called Balaji. This website story is quoting a woman in Namibia. Namibia, normally considered to be a country with a pretty good institutional environment. This woman, though, the story is on grabbing widows' estates, problem throughout sub-Saharan Africa. This woman, Serena, says, "I lost everything I had accumulated in 14 years of marriage. And to add to my pain, they, her husband's relatives, expected me to sleep with his younger brother, to be cleansed and inherited. I refused to be treated like a piece of furniture." So the mother of 12 lost her property and was forced to go to Windhoek, to the capital city, to look for some employment because she didn't have security of property rights. She wasn't able to keep her relatives from engaging in a costly land grabbing exercise. But perhaps the area where you will be most familiar, or that might resonate with you most, is the problem of conflict and post-conflict land insecurity. We know that in civil wars and other kinds of conflicts, people are displaced, they leave their homes are destroyed, their homes are ruined, they go to refugee camps. Sometimes other people will step in, invaders, conquerors, and whoever, militias will step in and occupy their property. What happens at the end of the conflict, though? How do you decide who really has rights to the property? Is it the original owner? Is it the person who invaded, who took over? In conflict situations and in post-conflict situations, land tenure issues are extremely important to address. And if you can't find a good way to resolve disputes in a post-conflict environment having to do with land tenure and land tenure security, I would argue you're going to have continuing problems over the long term. In each one of these cases I just outlined, whether it's the example of forcible evictions, whether it's the example of land grabbing, whether it's the example of tenure insecurity or as a result of conflicts, people who are victimized by these actions lack tenure security. They lack some other things, but importantly, they lack tenure security. And their chances of becoming victims once again are going to continue. It will continue. They may continue to be victimized unless and until governments find a way to reduce this tax of uncertainty that applies to land in many parts of the world. Having said that then, I wanted to give you just a quick definition of what people like Jolyne and I mean when we talk about land tenure security. This is a pretty typical definition. So by land tenure security, we mean an individual's perceptions of his or her rights to a piece of land on a continuing basis, not of a particular duration. Some people have a lot of tenure security over a short period of time. Some of you in the audience are leasing apartments, you probably have a lot of tenure security over your apartment, but you don't have a long period of time that you control the apartment. So people have a perception of rights to land on a continuing basis. Here's the important part: free from the interference of others, so that you can retain the benefits of investments and other actions you take relating to that property. So people who have tenure security aren't worried about being forcibly evicted, or if they're forcibly evicted, they know they have recourse to some legal action that's going to be protective of their rights. When we think about people holding property rights and having tenure security, we might think about the following issues. It's oftentimes important for people who have tenure security to have a pretty broad array of rights. Not always. Again, leasing is an example where you have a relatively narrow set of rights, but if the rights are protected by law, if they're clearly defined, that can give you tenure security. But a lot of times in situations in the developing world, people tend to have tenure and security because they hold a fairly thin bundle of property rights. If we're interested in promoting economic development and using land tenure security as a method to do that, sometimes we want to be promoting people's ability to hold land for longer periods of time, maybe for 30 years, maybe for 50 years, maybe for 99 years if they're leasing property, because there's a sense that gives people greater incentives to invest if they have a secure, longer-term hold over land. And we certainly think it's important that rights be clear, be clearly articulated, and importantly, that people know their rights will be respected. Sometimes tenure security will involve titling property, but it is not the case that tenure security is synonymous with property titling. People can have tenure security with something other than a title involved, or a formal title, the kind of titles that we may have to property. People who live on communal lands can have tenure security as long as their rights are clearly articulated and their rights are enforced. In the development literature, which may be the literature that you guys are most familiar with, people talk about why it's important to give folks tenure security, and there's a list, and I'm just going to read you through the list, but Jolyne will talk in more detail maybe about some of the benefits of tenure security that she's seen in her work over the past 20 years. So perhaps most importantly, tenure security gives folks predictability. You can predict what will happen in the future if someone invades your land or abuses your rights if you have tenure security. If you don't have tenure security, you can't predict what's going to happen. Are you going to become the victim of a private sector actor? Are you going to become the victim of a public sector actor? It's unclear. So tenure security gives people predictability. It gives them security from abusive behavior of others. Tenure security probably increases the value, almost certainly increases the value of land, although there could be other factors that might be militating against the value of the land rising, even if you have tenure security. Very importantly, when you have tenure security, clearly defined rights that are enforceable, you tend to have lower levels of conflict among people. One of the problems in the Sudan conflict, there are many problems, it's a very complicated situation, but there's an important land component in that conflict in Darfur. And to the extent that people aren't able to clearly articulate and enforce their property rights, that problem is likely to continue. Some people will argue that creating and providing poor people with land tenure security will create incentives to invest. This is actually a somewhat contentious issue in the literature, and it could be that investments will in fact push tenure security. There's some evidence that increasing tenure security will push investments, but there's not consensus in the literature on this point. It may also be the case that providing people with tenure security will help raise productivity of land, increase agricultural productivity, and especially in places like Africa, this would be a tremendous benefit. We know that there's a lot of talk today about a green revolution in Africa. It will be difficult to have a green revolution in Africa without tenure security of the land, and this is an issue that does not get discussed often enough, I think, in the African debates. So these are some of the reasons why tenure security is important. Here's another reason. Without security, we think people typically think that economic growth will be limited, and this is a real shame in the developing world. We want to do what we can to promote economic growth in the developing world, and land and tenure security issues, leasehold issues, are important components of promoting economic development. In the developing world, by some estimates, up to 3/4 of the wealth in those countries is land, the wealth that people hold in terms of land. For women, this is a particularly important issue. It's very difficult to get data on the amount of property that women own around the world, but the Food and Ag Organization has estimated that women may own as little as 2% of the land in the world. So giving women more secure tenure over the land assets that they do control would be very useful for promoting economic growth among women. So who needs tenure security? Well, Jolene's going to talk about this. I'll say very briefly that everybody needs tenure security, but in particular, the urban poor who are living in formal settlements and shack settlements need tenure security so they don't face the threat of forced evictions. Women in the developing world need tenure security so they're not disinherited, so that they're able to use and continue to use the properties that they have traditionally been able to use. People in post-conflict environments desperately need tenure security. They need to know that if they're going to occupy a piece of land after a conflict, someone else isn't going to come along and throw them off, making their investments worthless. Small-scale entrepreneurs, folks involved in SME activities, whose businesses are often home-based, need tenure security. These people and more. So how can governments provide tenure security? Jolyne's going to talk about some examples that she's seen around the world, and she's going to talk about what the Millennium Challenge Corporation is doing to promote those efforts. Here are some other things to keep in mind. Governments can provide legal clarity about the extent of rights. Governments can limit the use of eminent domain actions. Governments can limit forcible evictions that they pursue in the name of formalization. I've been in some developing countries and seen informal settlements and traders' areas demolished in the name of formalizing formalizing economic activity. This is, I think, quite problematic. Governments can allow for the registration of land and use rights that people do hold and allow individuals to upgrade the rights gradually and at a fairly low cost, so people don't face prohibitive costs. It's important to decentralize registration systems. Another important issue in the developing world may be releasing government land for use by poor people. Developing countries hold a lot of land in the public sector, especially in urban areas. It might be useful for governments to release some of that land for building purposes so that poorer folks in urban areas can have increased security. And of course, there's always and ever present the need to improve the rule of law. Well, what's exciting, we think, about the work that the MCC is doing is that the MCC is asking countries themselves to identify what they feel is the most pressing development challenges in their country. And in some cases, countries are saying, tenure security is really important. It's really important for us to address the problems that we have in our country that have to do with land issues. We understand that if we don't solve some of our land issues, we're not likely to have as much economic growth as we otherwise would have. So countries are identifying the need to improve tenure security as an important factor for economic growth and development, and they're asking for U.S. assistance in creating programs that hopefully are going to improve the situation on the ground for poor people. I think this effort is to be applauded, and I look forward to introducing Jolyne to you so she can tell you about her experiences at the MCC working with countries on land issues. But before I turn the table over to Jolyne, I want to tell you a little bit about her. Jolyne Sanjak is Senior Director of Property Rights and Land Policy at the MCC. She's responsible for assessing the relevant aspects of MCC compact development, and in addition to that, then she's got to oversee what the MCC does in terms of compact implementation. She's been with the MCC for 2 years now and has been extremely helpful to me over the past 2 years. When I have questions about land tenure issues, I know I can always pick up the phone and call Jolyne, and best of all, she'll have an answer. Because she's been at MCC for 2 years, but before that, she spent 20 years working on land tenure, property registration, and land market issues at USAID, where she was a lead specialist on property rights and land policy and rural development in Latin America and in the Caribbean. So although the MCC has done a limited number of compacts to date in Latin America, Jolyne has a world of experience in the Latin American area. And so you should feel free to ask her questions about Latin America that may not necessarily be covered or touched upon by MCC compacts. Before she joined USAID, Jolyne was an assistant professor of economics at the SUNY Albany, State University of New York at Albany, where she engaged in research focused on land tenure issues, agricultural productivity, and land market access for the poor. In addition to that, she was a research associate and project manager in Macedonia and Honduras with the University of Wisconsin's renowned Land Tenure Center. Her PhD is in Ag Economics from the University of Wisconsin. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jolyne Sanjak.
Well, thank you, Carol, and thank you all for coming to engage in this conversation with us. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to follow Carol and to discuss a bit broader set of issues. Carol focused on land tenure security, and I want to start off by broadening that to what I call property rights systems. And I like to use the word system because really to make property rights effective in the way they are, for example, in the United States, you need effective law and policy, you need effective institutions such as the property registry and information that can be used, for example, by a bank when they're trying to do a mortgage loan. And you also need to think about the tenure security level and the way that people engage with one another around property rights, uses, and transactions. And so I like to use the word property rights system rather than honing in at the beginning on land tenure security. Security of rights is important, but basically property rights, I agree with Carol, is a broad array of kinds of rights, use rights, full stop ownership rights. All of those things are important. Whatever kind of right it is, including indigenous communal rights, they need to be clearly defined. They need to be transferable at low cost. They need to be secure or enforceable, and they need to be of an appropriate duration for an investor or for a finance transaction if that is the relevant case or the relevant scenario. And so it's about tenure security, but it's also about incentives and transactional costs. Transactional costs, even for simple things like inheritance, in some of these countries are quite high. A lot of red tape involved in inheritance, even in El Salvador, and so people tend to do informal inheritance, and over time that creates problems of the sort that DeSoto describes, where the on-the-ground reality is very different than what the formal records might show. So while I agree with all of what Carol said, and I have worked a lot at MCC in Africa, and there are many parallels to Latin America. They're different contexts, but a lot of parallels. I'd like to talk a little bit more broadly, and from that broader perspective, risk, incentives, transactional costs, the importance of reforms and getting the legal framework right, getting the policy right, getting the registry to work efficiently, and getting the tenure security for the kinds of people that Carol described and others is really important to results like agricultural productivity, investment, not just in agriculture but in urban and commercial businesses, and financial market development. I think most of us understand now that a land title is not a magic bullet that if you have a land title you automatically get credit, but nonetheless, for financial markets to develop and mature, a land title system that works is quite important over time. So there are many benefits. Conflict is one of them, environmental sustainability is another, as well as the sort of productive economic impacts that we often stress. And I think that explains why, MCC is a demand-driven organization. We now have a very significant portfolio of investments in improving land tenure systems in a lot of countries. We have 8 countries around the world that have substantial land tenure projects that are either in implementation or approved by our board of directors. These include Madagascar, Benin, Nicaragua, Lesotho, Mongolia, Mozambique, and we have a couple in the pipeline such as Burkina Faso. We also have several countries that don't have big land projects, but certainly have elements in their projects in which they are attempting to address either the tenure security issues for vulnerable peoples or helping their business sector be able to do transactions more efficiently. And those include Ghana, Mali, Morocco, and Honduras. We also have a couple of very interesting cases, and El Salvador is one of them, so I'll elaborate on that, particularly where we have worked with the government to mitigate risks associated with, or risks that come from problems in land tenure that are associated with non-land tenure projects, such as roads or big agricultural development projects. So I think that's quite exciting. Yesterday I was speaking with someone who came to visit me, and he asked me, why is that? Why is MCC doing all this? And I pointed back, as Karol said, the countries, when asked what their priorities, are putting this on the table very frequently. And I think they're doing that because, if you think about back to the early 1990s when market-led economic development really took root and structural adjustments were happening, I think the presumption was that markets work sort of automatically, but in fact, a good property rights system is really a fundamental thing for markets to work well. And so over time, private sector development projects to help the rural poor, gender-based projects, environmental projects have continually bumped into one snag or another related to land tenure insecurity or inefficiency, red tape in the property registry system. And to me, that explains why we're getting this big demand for these kinds of projects. I want to stress 2 things that that I sort of draw out of what Karol said that are very relevant to the components or the way our projects are structured. One of them is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. There's a generic set of issues which both of us have hit on, but the particular country's history and context matters a lot in terms of how those issues play out and whether it's the credit market that's more important or whether it's the underlying risk for very poor people in an urban setting or a rural setting. And so therefore what you do about it needs to be tailored to the situation. And the second thing is property rights and land policy is a complex subject. It is economic, it is social, it's political, it's environmental. That sometimes scares people to sort of want to shy away from working on these issues, but in fact there is an emerging body of best practice where there are effective approaches that can bring these big, I think, rather substantial benefits to the development process. So that's what I wanted to say as a general kind of backdrop for reviewing with you our portfolio in Latin America and the Caribbean. As I rattled off the countries where we have investments, Latin America is the smallest region, both in terms of number of compacts, and also in terms of the number of projects that we have on this subject area. But what's interesting to me is that we have quite a variety of land activities or property rights activities in Latin America that I think are illustrative of the kinds of things that we're working on around the world. So let me start with Nicaragua. And I'll start with Nicaragua because that is the one country in Latin America where we have a very substantial land administration program or property registry program. And it is a $26.5 million project that is investing in really most of the major aspects of the property registry system in Lyon, in the Department of Lyon, in the western part of Nicaragua. The government has a nationwide program that is largely financed by the World Bank. There's a couple of other donors that are providing support as well, and they are operating in Chinandega, which is the other department where MCC's agriculture and roads investments are going, and that is why we are not doing property registration work in that department as well, because it's already being financed by another donor. We are sharing largely the same project structure, except that we have been able to work forward with the government and make some, I think, important advances on the design of the reforms that are being worked on. The project is urban and rural. It is not exclusively rural. It will address property rights issues both in urban areas and rural areas in Lyon. It includes a fairly significant emphasis on institutional capacity building, institutional streamlining, including the registry, the cadastre or mapping agency, and the environmental ministry and some other agencies that have a role in property rights in one way or another in Nicaragua. It includes an effort to do a comprehensive mapping of the rights that people have and the boundaries between people's properties across the rural areas. And it also includes, we like to call this component tenure regularization as opposed to land titling, because in Nicaragua, most of the properties at one time or another have a land title, but there are a gambit of issues that need to be straightened out in one way or another to make the property registry records consistent with what's on the ground and to resolve certain kinds of disputes and issues that exist. A lot of these are more regular issues than people might imagine. Many of the properties in Lyon are not in the agrarian reform sector and some of the bigger conflicts that you may have heard about, but many of them are simply informal inheritances that happened a long time ago, and the records need to catch up with what the families have done with their land. Administrative errors that may have happened in the past that need to be fixed. Titles that were partially processed but not fully processed at some other program in the past. And so we're working to straighten out and issue proper, full, cleaned up records for roughly 43,000 properties over the course of the project in Lyon. And this is largely being done in an area-wide systematic approach. However, we're really excited to be able to say that we've worked with the government to figure out what a way that we're calling I'm trying to translate it from Spanish, but we're calling it early land titling. And what we've been able to do is identify 350 or more cases where the title issues are such that they can be addressed relatively quickly through getting some good lawyers to work with the governmental agencies and to finish the processing of titles that may have already been started or have problems that are more easy to resolve. And so, in fact, next month they're expected to issue something like 350 titles under this new approach. And so that's kind of exciting. Another two things that I'd like to mention is that the project has an element of working with various actors, civil society, government, communities, to define formally the boundary lines of the protected areas in this region of Nicaragua, and to work with the communities to put into place effective natural resource management plans so that they can be good stewards of the land that they have rights over. And another thing that I think is quite interesting is we're funding a relatively small but important study together with an indigenous community that most of Nicaragua's indigenous are on the coastal areas, but there is sort of an interesting indigenous community in that part of Nicaragua that is less known about, and we're working with them to analyze and to figure out an appropriate way to formalize their rights as well, and to allow them to have the right incentives to be good stewards of one of the protected areas and some of the other land that they live in and work off of. So that's exciting. And one other thing, I guess, important to mention, and it tracks with some of the issues that Karol mentioned, we're really, really happy with the Nicaragua project and its strong emphasis on really having a good gender strategy, really making a great effort to reach out and include women all along the planning and implementation, and ensuring that women are significantly benefiting from this project as well as the other components. So that's Nicaragua. El Salvador, we do not have a land project in El Salvador. This is a very interesting case which illustrates the idea that sometimes you don't need MCC doesn't have to do a land project, but there may be land issues that effectively could have implications for the sustainability of our other investments, or could, if resolved, even magnify more of the expected impacts from one or another investment. So in El Salvador, we have a connectivity project which is largely focused on roads infrastructure across the north of El Salvador, and we also have a productive sectors project that is working on things like agroforestry with the farmers up in the northern part of El Salvador. And we came through our due diligence process to realize and agree with the government of El Salvador that formalizing and registering land rights mainly for the poor people in the region who, for lots of reasons, have clear rights, but they have not been recorded or titled, to work with the government to address that, or to call upon the government is probably a better way to say it, to address that. So the government agreed as a condition to those other two big projects to, with their own resources and know-how, to address this problem. And they have met our condition precedent for entry into force. They have gotten financing from the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, which is a donor, but it is a development bank, but it's not on as soft terms as, say, the World Bank, to finance this effort, to accompany our projects with a land tenure registration project in the north. And this, I think, is pretty exciting, and it reflects really that the government has learned a lot from their previous efforts with the World Bank and others on the how to and why to, and they've really stepped up to the plate on that. In Bolivia, I'm not going to say a whole lot because Bolivia has just turned in a revised proposal that is in very early, MCCs just starting to look at it, really early to say. It does not include a land project, but it does mention a couple of ways in which land tenure issues may, in particular indigenous land tenure issues, may or may not need to be looked at and considered in the context of an agricultural project. And so very early to say what may or may not evolve out of that, but certainly, depending on how the overall proposal ends up, we may need to incorporate some measures to work with the government within the context of another sector project to address some land issues. And maybe mitigate risks associated with land tenure is a way to say it. And Honduras, I think, is also another very interesting case. Honduras, we have a relatively small but very important activity, and it's not on movable property. It's not on land and buildings. It's on movable property. Movable property means things like cars, cattle, things that can also be pledged as collateral for loans and also are very important to protect in terms of the rights that people have over those. So what was proposed in Honduras and what we have agreed to finance is the establishment of a new, more effective movable asset registry that will be connected or interconnected with the real property registry that has been developed over the last couple of years. This is coming along with the government of Honduras adopting a very forward-looking secure transactions law that is patterned after the OAS model law on secure transactions. So I think that's also very exciting. Again, Karol said property is an array of rights, and I think if you look at financial markets and you go from sort of group-based microfinance all the way up to big mortgages and other kinds of finance, in the middle, for small businesses in particular, for poorer people, movable assets are fairly important. So that's kind of what we're doing in Honduras. And I'll just conclude with kind of going back to the more general. I think demand is relatively high in MCC for this kind of work, reflecting the various reasons that Karol and I have given you. We are responding, I think, and coming up with very interesting projects that really are trying to put into practice best practice, lessons learned from lots of experience in the past around the world. And I think I just want to end with a little anecdote. We just had a delegation here from Benin that went to Colorado. Tremble Corporation, which is a U.S. business that sells GPS and the underlying infrastructure that allows GPS to work, that kind of equipment. The government of Benin has contracted with our money, Tremble Corporation, to help them install some equipment that will allow them in a relatively low-cost way to use GPS to define the boundaries of these rural communities and farmers' lands. And so they came out, got to go out to Colorado, got to see how it works in the U.S., got to work with our National Oceanic Administration and Geodetic Survey to just kind of get some basic training and understand and see what they were purchasing. And I thought that was a wonderful example of how this model can effectively build bridges and really help these countries transform as they move into development. So I'll end with that.
Dr. Sanjak, you mentioned the gender component of the first program you mentioned. Can you speak just for a moment on what it involves? You mentioned that it exists and there's a strong gender component to it, but I was curious to know what exactly it involves and whether there are currently problems with land rights for women in that country.
That was our Nicaragua compact, and Let me start by saying, in fact, Nicaragua has done a fair amount of progressive work on ensuring that their legal framework is equitable towards women. And some of the past projects have also had fairly good success rates in getting women to be beneficiaries and women having titles or having joint titling between men and women. But it's not a finished agenda, and there is a need to continue to ensure that their legal framework is reflected in practice. And so a gender analysis was conducted first under a World Bank program and then refined and put into a strategy under our project that really looked at, from the project management structure, from the the governmental institutions and their sort of way that they think about their work, down to who are the beneficiaries and what are their needs. I was involved in the compact development for Nicaragua, but I have not been in a direct hands-on way. Someone on my team is the particular lead on it, so I don't know in a detailed way the specifics of how that's played out, but I'd be glad to give you his name and you could contact him and he could give you more information. I will say that and there's some interesting stuff on MCA Nicaragua's website. They have held a series of, even before the compact, they held a series of consultations with women's groups, and they invited them to comment upon work plans and things like that. And they've, I think, recently had another series of outreach events on it. Beyond that, I think it would be better for me to give you my colleague's name, and you could follow up with him directly.
There got to be some questions out there.
I
guess for either one of you, which countries typically in Latin America, maybe the ones that you didn't address, typically have the most problems with property rights?
Okay, boy, that's a tricky question. I think they all have issues with property rights, and there's actually when I was at USAID, one of the main things that I did was lead our country's participation in the Summit of the Americas, and since 1998, the Summit of the Americas has had a pronounced focus on the property rights agenda and getting a cohesive sort of commitment at that level, and we were trying to sort of take it from the presidential level down. And there's a good website called LandNet Americas that we helped create that the OAS runs, and there's quite a lot of information there, but they all have a lot of problems, and it's sort of hard to say which one has more or less. Their problems are very different. So for example, in Guatemala, I said that in Nicaragua, most of the properties at one time have had a title, and so the issue is really fixing and sort of rectifying the on-the-ground reality with what's in the property registry, whereas in Guatemala, in the rural areas, maybe the majority of properties have never even had a title in the first place, and so it's a different sort of problem. Some countries have more conflict over land. So, and that there's some nice information about that on the website. There are, pockets of land conflict that go on. Guatemala in the post-war context, certainly all the countries in the post-war have had their share of land conflicts, but some of that is more pronounced than others. Some countries, this is why we like to have exchanges among the countries, because some countries have moved ahead and done a fabulous job tackling the legal framework. Honduras, very recently, in the last 3 years, did some very, very important path-breaking legal reform that until recently, they had not been able to achieve. Other countries may not have started to tackle that, but may have advanced on indigenous land rights. So it's really hard to say which one has more or less. They all have some problems or another, and it's what kind of problem is more important in which country.
Any other questions?
That's easy if you can answer.
You did an excellent job answering all their questions ahead of time, so I appreciate it. If you can thank me and thank our speakers, we appreciate it.